Hello and welcome to a high school presentation on the SAT suite of assessments. Today we're going to talk about the PSAT and the SAT key features. The PSAT and SAT are meant to measure a student's skills important for post-high school success. So these skills will include being able to read and write and analyze and comprehend challenging texts, and these texts will often include science, history, and career-related topics. Students will need to be able to revise and edit text across a range of academic and career-related topics. They'll also need to demonstrate proficiency in using grammar and punctuation. Students will also need to show a command of basic math skills, and these math skills will need to be applied to different situations such as science, social studies, and also career-related contexts. Students will also need to demonstrate that they are able to make careful and considered use of evidence in reading and writing. Students will also need to demonstrate skills in analyzing data, and that data may be represented graphically, such as in tables, graphs, and charts. And students, remember that this is just one exam, and so students are able to demonstrate these skills in various ways in their everyday lives. The College Board SAT suite of assessments is just one of those methods, and so just remember that standardized tests can be challenging, they can be long, and that they are only one way to measure a student's abilities and skills. And remember, the PSATs and SATs are optional exams and they are not meant for every student. So please consider that when watching this video, whether the PSAT and SAT is right for your student. So when do students take the suite of assessments? So the PSAT 10 is exactly the same as the PSAT NMSQT taken in 11th grade. The only difference is that it's taken in 10th grade, hence the name PSAT 10. Our students are actually able to take the PSAT in both 10th and 11th grade. The 11th grade PSAT is the score that is used for the National Merit Scholarship. So that's why you see the PSAT taken in the 11th grade also referred to as the PSAT NMSQT, or the National Merit Scholarship Qualifying Test. The PSAT specifically taken in 11th grade, that's the only one where the score is used for National Merit Scholarship consideration. The SAT is used for college admissions and applications, and this can be taken in 11th and 12th grade. Some students are also able to take it at lower grade levels in 9th and 10th. Usually students will wait and prepare taking high school math and English before taking the SAT, just because it's optional for college admissions, and usually they want to build up their math and English skills before they take the SAT in 11th and 12th grade. The SAT is an optional exam used for college admissions, and please note that many schools have gone test optional, meaning that it's entirely up to the student whether they want to take the SAT or not. Keep in mind the UC and CSU systems, or the major public California college systems, do not take the SAT into consideration when evaluating a student's application. So even if your student earns a perfect score on the SAT, if they're applying to a UC and CSU, those scores won't be considered for admissions purposes. However, they will still look at the exam score and look at that score for consideration in GE requirements and program requirements. So I always recommend that students do their due diligence and research the program and the school that they wish to apply to before taking the SAT. They should check to see if the SAT is recommended, or if it's required, or if it's not going to be factored into admissions at all. This will vary from school to school and will also vary depending on the program. So if your student isn't sure whether they should take the PSAT or SAT, they should probably make an appointment with the high school counselor and then discuss their options and think of a list of colleges that they want to apply to, so that we can really double check whether PSAT and SATs are needed. If your student is a strong test taker, I do recommend that they might want to sit for the PSAT in 11th grade, just because they could have that high score and qualify for a scholarship. Okay, so the biggest difference, the PSAT 10 and the PSAT NMSQT are actually the same test. The only difference is the tie-in to the National Merit Scholarship. So in the fall, we administer the PSAT and NMSQT. Typically, it's always in the month of October. The specific day will vary. It depends on the school year when that test day is. The PSAT NMSQT is tied into the National Merit Scholarship, and it can be administered to 10th and 11th graders, and at our schools, we allow all of our 10th and 11th graders to register. We usually recommend that the really high achieving 10th graders sit for the exam in 10th grade just to practice and get a feel for the exam, and then in 11th grade, they can take it again, and they often can feel more prepared when they have gone through that process before, and they just know that it's just one test and it's not anything to be scared or stressed over. Depending on the number of students interested, the testing location may change. So in the past, our schools have administered the PSAT at Citrus Heights Community Center. Depending on how many students register, we could change that location depending on our size needs. And so please just reach out to your high school counselor. Sometimes our testing center is located a little bit further than most families would like to drive, so they might need to contact local high schools and make testing arrangements elsewhere. And so if you are in one of those situations where, for example, if we're testing at Citrus Heights for our schools, that might be a little too far for your specific case, so you might want to find an outside testing location. If that is very difficult to find, then please reach out to a high school counselor. Not every local high school will allow outside students to test, so it does take a while to prepare all of that. So please reach out to your high school counselor if you know that you'll need help with making testing arrangements. But of course, our students are always welcome to test at our testing center. Okay, so what to know about the digital PSAT and SAT? Well, first things first, we have gone all digital. So that is very different from what I'm used to, at least. I'm used to a paper and pencil test. That kind of dates me now. But everything is digital, which is kind of nice. So the SAT suite of assessments is all digital. The PSATs will be digital by fall of 2023, and by spring of 2024, the SATs will all be digital as well. This means that the exams are now adaptive and they have fewer questions and are more secure and can also be shorter now. So since everything is digital, that means students and educators also receive their scores in a few days instead of a few weeks, so there's no long wait period anymore. And tests are much more secure because every student will have a unique form of that test. And so it's very difficult to share answers. The PSAT and SAT exams are much shorter now. So that means before it used to take 3 hours, which is quite long to sit for an exam. And now it can last up to 2 hours and 14 minutes. So students actually have more time on average to answer each question. And in multi-stage adaptive testing, what that means is that each test section is divided into 2 equal length separately timed stages. So in Module 1, students are actually going to get a mix of easy, medium, and hard questions, and that is going to allow students to demonstrate their achievement before moving on to the second module. In the second module, those questions will be more focused on the test taker's actual achievement level based on how they performed in the first module. So, for example, that means questions that they see in the first module, depending on how they do, they might see students might either see harder or easier questions in Module 2. So questions on average will be either higher difficulty or lower difficulty than the questions in Module 1. This is to help hone in on that student's skill and to make sure that students aren't repeating the same questions over and over again. So if they score very high in Module 1, they will see more difficult, more challenging questions, so we can really zero in on what their score range should be. So what that means is the test actually adapts to the student's performance range. The PSAT stands for the practice SAT, so that means the score range is very similar to the SAT, and that means when the score ranges are pretty similar, that means it is a pretty predictive test. It's very accurate. Whatever you get on the PSAT, usually that's how you will do. You'll score similarly on the SAT, barring any unforeseen circumstances. The test structure is also very much the same for the PSAT and for the SAT. So however your student does, it's a very good predictor of how they will do on the SAT itself. All right, so in this section, we're going to discuss the format and timing of the SAT suite of assessments. So now that this tests are all going to be digital, this means that the exams are adaptive and they will have fewer questions, they're more secure, and they're now shorter too. And so the type of questions will also slightly shift and change from what we're used to on the paper-based test. So we're going to go over the structure of that SAT and PSAT. So the SAT, PSAT related assessments, the format will be split into two sections, a reading and writing section and a math section. The reading and writing section has 4 option multiple choice questions, and the math section will have 4 option multiple choice questions as well as student produced response questions. That means there won't be an answer choice. Students will simply solve the problem and then pen in, or in this case, type in their answer. And each section for the reading and writing section is comprised of each module is comprised of 27 questions and lasts for 32 minutes. And then the math section is broken up into 2 modules, 22 questions each, and both modules will take 35 minutes. So remember that module 1 will contain easy, medium, and hard questions, while module 2 will adapt to the student's level and either be easier or harder depending on how they did in module 1. All right, so let's move on to look at the actual app. So because it's all digital, that means our students will actually need a testing app installed on their Chromebook. If they are testing at our school, we will be providing the Chromebooks for testing, and we will have Bluebook downloaded in advance. In this breakdown, you will see all the different features and tools of that Bluebook testing app. So there is actually a timer. So the testing timer will count down the remaining time in each module. Students can actually hide that timer if they don't like to see a timer count down. I know that can make some students a little bit nervous. So they can actually hide the timer. It will still go off when there's 5 more minutes remaining in the module. So that's kind of nice if they don't do well with time pressure. 3, students will be able to expand the directions and reread them. 4, there is a battery icon so that the students can see how much battery life is remaining on their laptop. There is also 5, an annotation tool, which is really nice. That means students can actually highlight the reading portion. They can make little notes to themselves as well. So that way they are able to refer back to those notes if they forget, and they can summarize what they've read as well. 6, students can mark questions for review, so they can actually flag a question that they want to return to. 7, there is a option eliminator, which is really nice. It doesn't mean that the student will see fewer answers available. It doesn't mean that the College Board is really generous and will take away the wrong answers for you. It just means that if a student is really sure that they know an answer is wrong, they can actually cross it out and say, I know this is wrong, and narrow down their choices in a visual way. 8, students are actually able to expand the text box. Either way, they can expand the text or expand the question, however they wish to view the screen. Otherwise, it's normally a 50-50 split. And there is 9, this section right here, there is a question menu, so they can actually jump from question to question. So if they flag anything for mark for review, they can actually go back and review it if they have time at the end of the module. All right, for the math section, it will look largely the same. There is a question menu. They can jump from question to question. They can also mark for review. The key features for the math section, there is an additional calculator that is embedded into each of the modules for the math section. That means calculators are allowed for both math sections, or both math modules, which is really nice. Back in the day, you had one section with calculator and one section without. Now, because you have a calculator with your smartphone, with any device you're on, it seems practical that a calculator is embedded with every single module of the math exam. So that's kind of nice. But remember, it is a digital calculator. It is basically, it looks like a Desmos calculator. If you've used that app in your class, that is the type of graphing calculator that is provided. Students are also able to bring their own physical calculator as long as it's a approved calculator. You can go on the College Board to view a list of approved calculators, but that's also an option for students. And then there's also a reference guide, which is super neat. The reference sheet will contain a list of very commonly used formulas for math, so students can refer to this and they don't have to memorize that many formulas anymore for success on this portion of the test. All right, so let's talk about College Board accommodations. So in this section, we're going to discuss what students should do if they need accommodations on any of the College Board exams. So if your student needs an accommodation, that means they can request an accommodation through the College Board's Services for Students with Disabilities, or SSD office. These accommodations can be used for the PSAT, the SAT, and the AP exams. And once approved, the accommodations are actually applied to all the exams for the College Board. Some will have different exams, different accommodations are approved for certain exams and not for all, just simply because there's no writing section on the PSAT, for example. There is a grammar section, but there's no physical writing section where you have to produce an essay. For AP exams, however, there is a writing portion, so the writing accommodations are only applied to the AP exam and not the PSAT. Students will need to provide documentation. So documentation includes doctor's notes, professional evaluations, a formal IEP, or 504 plan. And certain disabilities may actually require specific and additional documentation, and certain accommodation requests can also require additional documentation. Accommodations do take up to 7 weeks to approve, so families should plan accordingly. If additional documentation is needed, that means we would have to resubmit the request, and that could take an additional 7 weeks. So keep in mind when you want to take a College Board exam, and please try to request those accommodations well in advance, just so we have a good window before the deadline to submit that request. All right, and families, they may submit on their own or ask the school to request accommodations on their behalf. So they can either fill out the form directly, so that means they would go to the College Board website and actually download the form. So there's instructions listed, there's deadlines, and they can actually fill out the eligibility form. Or they can have the school request on their behalf. If that's the case, then the family will actually need to obtain a consent form, fill the consent form out, and ask that the school fill out everything on their behalf, which is usually the easier process. Once you download that form, it can be pretty tricky. There is a how-to guide, but that form is quite intense. There are multiple items that the student will need to answer. For example, what accommodations are requested, if there's breaks, if there's other devices that are needed, if there's reading and seeing assistance that's needed. You do have to give information about the disability and provide documentation. So it is a very big form to fill out. So if families do not want to fill that out themselves, then they are always welcome to ask the school to request accommodations on their behalf. So requesting accommodations through the school. So if this is the way that families choose to request accommodations, they would fill out the consent form. That consent form just simply states that the parent or guardian or student is allowing the school to share private information, so information found on the IEP or the 504. The student's disability information will be shared with the College Board. So that is the consent form, and that just needs to be filled out and completed and submitted to our school's SSD coordinator, which is me, Linda Chen. You can email the form to me at linda.chen@sequoiagrove.org, and I'm happy to fill out and request those accommodations. And I will walk you through the whole process and keep you updated depending on the decision from the College Board. So students should also then decide which College Board exams they want to take in the future and when they plan to take them. So do they plan to take the SATs, the PSATs, the AP exams, and maybe what they want to take and when they want to take all those exams. And then once I get that consent form, I will work with the case manager and make sure everything is submitted through the SSD portal. And so once approved, those accommodations will actually stay with the student throughout high school. So that SSD number is what a student will get once they submit a request. Once approved, that number follows the student. Even if they transfer schools, that SSD number will stay the same. So it is important to complete this process as early as possible, even if a student is in 9th grade and they want to take an exam maybe in 10th grade, the PSAT in 10th grade, they should probably get started early on just so that we have everything accounted for and submitted properly. The College Board will send a formal letter in the mail to the family with all the accommodations, and they will have that SSD number. Of course, if you lose that number, don't worry, I will provide that number as well. And so I will also send a digital copy of that letter so the family has that for reference. The accommodations, there are some accommodations that cannot be applied to every single College Board exam, and that approval letter will give the details about each accommodation and each test as well. Remember, accommodations do take up to 7 weeks to approve, so families should plan accordingly. You can also visit the College Board website to look at what kind of accommodations are available. So there's a few right there. If you click on the College Board site, you'll actually see what accommodations are available. You'll also learn how to, let's learn about the basics. When you look at that site, you'll also see who is eligible. You'll actually see what kind of accommodations are available. So extended time, breaks, the use of a calculator, assistive technology, and others. So you can request all of these, and when you select a accommodation, you can actually see who is eligible, examples of what is allowed, and then they'll also give you documentation guidelines. So for example, each accommodation, depending on the accommodation, you might need to provide specific documentation depending on what it is. So now we're going to talk about the different key features of the PSAT and SAT. So in the reading and writing section of the PSAT and SAT, students will encounter texts of various complexities. So on the SAT, the complexity will range from 9th grade level to college level reading. For the PSAT NMSQT, the range of text complexity will vary from 9th grade to 10th grade. Students will encounter a series of passages and also associated multiple choice questions. The passages will cover a range of academic topics, and the text will vary in complexity. Some of those contexts will include literature, history, humanities, and science. So students should expect to read various passages on different types of topics. They will also need to analyze informational graphics, so like tables, bar graphs, and line graphs. Students will also need to refer to specific language used in the passages and use careful reasoning to draw inferences that can be supported by evidence. And there will be an emphasis on high utility words and phrases in context. Students will also need to focus on revising and editing writing to improve the effectiveness of expression, so that they'll need to demonstrate a command of standard English structure. Usage and punctuation errors, both mechanical and rhetorical, will show up, and students will need to recognize those errors and also correct them. So really, for reading and writing, students should focus on words and context, command of evidence, expression of ideas, and standard English conventions. This is a breakdown of all the content domains found in the reading and writing section, a description of each of those domains, and also the skills and types of knowledge that students should have to be successful in each section. There is a question distribution it's pretty evenly spread throughout, but students can expect about 20 to 25% or more coverage in each of these domains. So students should study the craft and structure for English, information and ideas, being able to analyze texts and gather information, and understand how to make inferences from that information that can be presented in a text form or in a graphical form. Students should have strong editing skills and should understand the standard English conventions, so they should have a firm grasp on basic English grammar. And students should be able to revise text to improve the expression of ideas. So they should understand the message that is trying to be conveyed through a reading passage and also understand how to apply standard English writing conventions to make that expression of ideas a little bit stronger and clearer. All right, the math section, my personal favorite section. The biggest change since going digital is the calculators are allowed throughout the test now. So there is no longer a calculator portion and a non-calculator portion. Every single math section will have a calculator embedded in the Blue Book app. So that means students can use a calculator throughout the entire test. Of course, students can also bring their own approved calculator on test day if they're more comfortable with that. Students will answer multiple question types, so there will be multiple choice questions and also student-produced responses. So just be aware, for student-produced responses, there will not be a multiple choice type answer available. Students will have to solve the problem and type in their answer. Many questions will be set in real-world context, so they will see problems related to social studies, science, and career context. What that will look like is the data presented. There might not be like well-rounded, perfect numbers. It might be real-world numbers found in like a science study. You'll see decimals, you'll see imperfect numbers, and all of those questions might refer to real-world context. So just be aware of that. It's not always going to be a formula or an equation that is like x plus 1 equals 3, and you have to solve for that x. It's not always that straightforward. The math test will assess fluency in understanding algebra, problem solving and data analysis, linear equations, and also advanced mathematical topics. And those advanced mathematical topics will include geometry and also trigonometry. So for the student-produced responses, students will need to grid in their answers or type in their answers in this digital format. And so that also means students might see a question with multiple solutions. So students should always apply their critical thinking skills, and also, if there is time, to check their answers, because sometimes when a math problem has multiple solutions, only one is a viable solution. So students should always check their work if time allows. So just like the reading and writing portion, the math portion is also broken up into multiple content domains, and there is a distribution of all the question types. So for the most part, about 35% of that test will be algebra based. So there will be a lot of questions regarding linear equations of 1 and 2 variables and systems of equations. So students should be used to solving for that. There are advanced mathematic topics. This is 35% of the exam usually, or the math section. And so students will need to understand absolute value, quadratic equations, exponential equations. Basically, nonlinear equations will come into play for advanced mathematics. For problem solving and data analysis, this only makes up about 15% of the math portion. And so students will need to look at ratios, rates, proportional relationships. They will probably interpret some graphs in this point. They will need to analyze 1 and 2 variable data. So that data can be represented in graph form or equation form. So students should be ready for that. There also will be geometry and trigonometry. About 15% of the math section is based on geometry and trigonometry. For the PSATs, the SATs, there will be geometry, and so just students should study volume, angles, triangles, and a little bit of trigonometry will be involved. Circles will also be covered in this section as well. And just note, if a student is taking PSAT 8 and 9, which our schools do not offer, the PSAT 8 and 9 will not cover trigonometry questions. That's only for PSAT 10 and above. So now we're going to go over some sample questions found on the PSAT and SAT. So for this reading and writing sample question 1, please read the passage, read the question, and then read the answer choices. Make up your mind on which answer choice is the best one before unpausing this video. So go ahead and pause, read everything, then unpause the video to find the correct answer. So this question actually touches upon the domain, information, and ideas. There is information to be conveyed, and the students will need to demonstrate the skill of having a command of evidence. So they're going to need to read this passage and find the answer based on the information presented. So in this case, the correct answer is D. The passage states that Jimsa and colleagues' hypothesis was the sail-like structure on the back of the S. aegypticus enhanced the dinosaur's ability to travel underwater to hunt down prey species capable of making quick and evasive movements. This choice's finding would effectively support the hypothesis because it would indicate that the sail-like structure would enable a dinosaur moving underwater to maneuver more quickly than a dinosaur moving under without the structure. Choice A is a distractor explanation, so it's incorrect because it would essentially contradict the hypothesis by suggesting that a dinosaur moving underwater with a sail-like structure would move more slowly than a dinosaur moving underwater without the structure. Choice B is incorrect because there is no clear passage-based relationship between the amount of water displaced and the hypothesis. Choice C is incorrect because there's no clear passage-based relationship between the amount of battery power used and the hypothesis. So again, this reading and writing sample question relates to a command of evidence. So that means students are looking through the passage to find evidence. For choice B and C, these were incorrect because there was no evidence found in the reading to support those answers. All right. Next sample question. So go ahead and pause the video, read the passage, read the question and answers, and choose the best answer. So this question talks about information and ideas again, but instead the skill demonstrated here will be inferences. So students will need to read the passage, understand what the meaning is, and try to infer what the scientists are trying to convey with all of this information. So the correct answer here is choice B. B is the best answer because the passage indicates that although scientists recognize that sleep, which is widespread among animal species, has benefits, some scientists believe that deep, prolonged sleep is so risky from the perspective of an animal species survival and well-being that there must be some so far undiscovered advantages to sleep to make it worthwhile from an evolutionary standpoint. Choice A is incorrect because the passage suggests that the extent of deep, prolonged sleep among animal species is well understood by scientists, and that the real question for scientists is why so many animal species engage in deep, prolonged sleep. Choice C is incorrect because the passage offers no evidence that any trait other than deep prolonged sleep poses poses both benefits and risks for animal species. Choice D is incorrect because the passage offers no evidence that any trait other than deep prolonged sleep has one or more functions that are hard for scientists to understand. Sample question 3. So go ahead and pause the video, read the passage, read the question, and the answer choices. So in this question, we're looking at craft and structure now, and students are specifically to understand words in context. In this case, for this question, choice A is the best answer. As used in the last sentence of the passage, quality refers to a trait or attribute, or in this case, a characteristic. Specifically, Jay Gatsby's resourcefulness of movement, which manifested as restlessness. Choice B is incorrect because although Jay Gatsby's resourcefulness of movement is a trait or attribute, referring to it as a standard implies that he is meeting a requirement or criterion set by others, a conclusion the passage does not support. Choice C and D are incorrect because neither prestige or accomplishment makes sense in this context. So we're really looking at the words in the context of this passage. For question 4, go ahead and pause the video, read the passage, read the question, and read those answers. Now that you've selected the correct answer, the domain that this question covers is standard English conventions. So we're looking at grammar, and we're specifically going to develop a skill of setting boundaries in the writing by using grammar and punctuation in this case. So the correct answer is actually choice D. No punctuation is needed. The distractor explanations, A, B, and C, are all wrong, or all incorrect because it inserts a unnecessary punctuation mark, so a comma, a colon, and a semicolon respectively. It inserts those punctuations between the subjects, the sentence's subject, which is the reason falling, and the verb, which is. So there is an incorrect punctuation mark there that actually breaks up the thought. So these are all the reading and writing sample questions that we have covered today. You can go to the College Board, take practice exams, or even download a guide to the digital PSAT and digital SAT to look at more sample questions. So on to the math section. Go ahead and read the question, pause the video, take out some scratch paper, and try to solve the equation. And when you come up with the best answer, unpause the video to find out what the answer is. So for this math sample question 1, first, this covers the domain of algebra, and we're specifically looking at linear functions and evaluating linear functions given an input value. So in this case, we're given that x equals 2, and so the best choice is answer C. The value of f of 2 can be found by substituting 2 for x in the given equation f of x equals x plus 7, which yields f of 2 equals 2 plus 7, or f of 2 equals 9. The value of g of 2 can be found by substituting 2 for x in the given equation, g of x equals 7x, which yields g of 2 equals 7 times 2, or 14. The value of the expression 4 times f of 2 minus g of 2 can be found by substituting the correct values into the expression, which gives 4 times 9 minus 14, or 36 minus 14, or 22. Choice A is incorrect. This is the value of f of 2 minus g of 2, not 4 times f of 2 minus g of 2. Choice B is incorrect because choice B might result from calculating 4 times f of 2 as f times 2 plus 7 rather than f parentheses 2 plus 7. Choice D is incorrect and may actually result from conceptual or calculation errors. So please note that all the wrong answers may have resulted from calculation errors, so it's very important for students to solve the equation carefully but quickly, and also if there is time to check their answers to make sure it makes sense. Notice that choice A is incorrect because students missed a multiplication value and didn't read the question carefully. For choice B, it was a computational error, so there was a misunderstanding of the order in which the equation should have been solved. And choice D is incorrect because that might have just been a simple calculation error. So keep that in mind and try to solve all your math equations carefully. All right, question 2. Go ahead and pause the video, look at the question, and try to solve the question, and then unpause the video when you have the answer. So for this question, we're actually talking about advanced mathematical topics. So we're solving a non-linear function. In this case, it's a quadratic equation, and we're going to find a key feature of that quadratic function. In this case, it's a minimum value. And for this question, choice C is correct. A quadratic function in the form of g of x equals a times x minus h squared plus k, where a, h, and k are constants, has a minimum value of k at x equals h, where a is greater than 0. The given quadratic function can be rewritten as g of x equals x squared, or equals 1 times x minus 0 squared plus 55, where h is 0, k is 55, and therefore the minimum value of the given function is 55. If you have not talked or covered quadratic functions yet and their standard form, then perhaps an easier way to solve this would be to graph this function and look at where the minimum value is. Choice A is incorrect and may have resulted from squaring the minimum value. Choice B is incorrect and may have resulted from multiplying the minimum value by 2. Choice D is incorrect. This is the x value at which the minimum value of g of x occurs. So students will need to know that the minimum value actually refers to g of x rather than x in this case. On to sample question 3. There will be a graph given, so students should read the question, look at the graph, and then read the question and find the best answer. So this question will cover problem solving and data analysis, and in this case, students will demonstrate the skill that they are able to analyze a 2-variable data system. So they'll be able to look at a scatter plot and analyze and interpret that data on that scatter plot. So in this case, choice C, again, is correct. At x equals 32, the line of best fit has a y value between 2 and 3. So the only choice with a value between 2 and 3 is choice C. Choice A is incorrect. This is the difference between the y value predicted by the line of best fit and the actual y value at x equals 32, rather than the y value predicted by the line of best fit at x equals 32. Choice B is incorrect because this is the y value predicted by the line of best fit at x equals 31 rather than at x equals 32. And choice D is incorrect. This is the y value predicted by the line best fit at x equals 33 rather than x equals 32. All right, so for question 4, go ahead and read the question, look at the answers, and choose the best solution possible. All right. For this question, we're now covering geometry and trigonometry. And in this specific case, we're looking at a right triangle, and we're going to use the Pythagorean theorem to solve the problem. And sometimes for students solving math problems, they might want to try to visualize everything first. So they could sketch on their scratch paper a rectangle, for example, since this question refers to a rectangle, draw that diagonal, label that diagonal and that shorter side with the numbers given, And then once you see the shape visually, you might recognize that this is a right triangle, and that's why we're going to find we're going to use the Pythagorean theorem to find the missing side. Hopefully students will recognize that this is a right triangle question once they draw everything out. And when you solve for the missing side, you'll find that choice B is the correct answer. A rectangle's diagonal divides a rectangle into two congruent right triangles, where the diagonal is the hypotenuse of both triangles. It's given that the length of the diagonal is 5 square root of 17, and the length of the rectangle's shorter side is 5. Therefore, each of the two right triangles formed by the rectangle's diagonal has a hypotenuse with length of 5 root 17 and a shorter leg of 5. To calculate the length of the longer leg, the student will need to use the Pythagorean theorem, or a squared plus b squared equals c squared, in which a and b are the lengths of the legs and c is the length of the hypotenuse. So let's substitute 5 for a, 5 root 17 for c. So that gives a squared plus b squared equals c squared, which yields 5 squared plus b squared equals 2 root 17 squared, which is the equivalent of 25 plus b squared equals 425. And so we will subtract 25 from both sides, which yields b squared equals 400. And then we're going to take the positive square root to solve for b, and b will equal 20. And so therefore the longer leg of the right triangle formed is 20. So choice A is incorrect and may have resulted from dividing the length of the rectangle's diagonal by the length of the rectangle's shorter side, rather than using the Pythagorean theorem. Choice C is incorrect and may have resulted from using the length of the rectangle's diagonal as the length of the leg instead of the hypotenuse. And choice D is incorrect because it's still the square of the length of the rectangle's longer side. So the student might have forgotten to take the square root of that leg. All right, so now that we've gone through the sample questions, I want to point you to some resources to prepare for the PSAT or SAT if you're choosing to take either of those exams. So some resources, you'll notice that I'm referencing the College Board quite a bit. There is a PSAT NMSQT website. This will go through the digital exam. It has the ability to look at what kind of questions are in there. You can also start practicing and actually take some assessments to get ready for that test. You'll also just be able to discover scholarships and learn about the scholarships tied to this test. The SAT page on the College Board also allows you to follow the dates and deadlines for registration, and then you'll also be able to learn more about the score release, but you'll also be able to practice through Khan Academy, and you'll be able to look at some practice material through this page. There's some student guides that students can download directly from the College Board. So there is a PSAT NMSQT student guide. This is a very long guide. It's 51 pages, so it's quite thorough, but it breaks down what the digital test will cover. It also has some sample questions and guidelines, so it does break down quite a bit. This is a lot of information. Same with the SAT student guidebook from the College Board. It is about 50 pages and it includes the same information. There will be test-taking tips, some practice questions, and important information about the structure of that exam. There are practice tests available as well. So for the PSAT, you can download a full-length exam directly from the College Board. The SAT, there is also a full-length SAT practice exam available through the College Board. You can also go through the Khan Academy for a full-length prep for both of those tests. There's also a digital SAT prep course that you can take. You can even upload upload your PSAT score and have it calibrate to what your needs are, it can actually break down what sections you need additional help with. So there are a variety of topics that the Khan Academy course covers if you would like to prepare that way. There's also a digital SAT sample question. Since we are moving digital, there are some sample questions and answer explanations. We reviewed some of those questions here today, but there are many more examples that we did not cover, and this will cover a variety of the domains and skills found on that SAT and PSAT. All right, and for the Khan Academy, just remember this is a free resource that students can utilize. There are Khan Academy videos covering each topic. There are full-length practice tests, and there is interactive problems and instant feedback, so it will give students feedback as they're going through. There is also an app where they can download and daily practice. If you're not one to sit down for a full-length test to practice, then maybe download the app and then you can practice one question at a time every day in preparation for the PSAT and SAT. So some tips for success. One, you might want to register and sign up through Khan Academy. You can get personalized practice based on your PSAT and SAT needs. Remember to use evidence to support your arguments, so always read passages carefully and make sure that you're able to back up your answers with relevant quotations or data through the passage. Make sure you build your reading stamina. There is quite a bit of reading. The nice thing about the digital exam is that the reading passages are a little bit shorter now and a little bit more focused. But again, you should practice reading just reading articles of different varieties. So not just novels, but try to read challenging passages found in literature, found in nonfiction, found in informational texts. Reading a cereal box could be helpful. Just building that stamina. So just remember to read often and read a variety of different read on a variety of different topics. So maybe even picking up a newspaper or logging on to a news site and reading some articles there would be really good for building stamina. Always analyze informational graphics. So get used to looking at charts, tables, and graphs. Sometimes we see that in a textbook and we just skip it. But really look at that table, look at that chart carefully, and make sure you understand the supporting graphics and how that supporting graphic relates to the text that you are reading. Get excited about U.S. founding documents. So if you haven't taken U.S. history yet, you might want to look up some of the founding documents. So there will be at least one passage that you will encounter that probably references a founding document. So don't worry, you don't have to memorize anything, but you should understand the context and the importance. So just get used to reading some Old English that you might find on those founding documents. Practice editing. So focus on using precise words, organizing sentence structures, using grammatical conventions to convey a central theme and to make sure that your writing is clear. So practice editing. Check your answers, especially for the math section. You can flag questions that you want to refer back to. So remember, that's always an option. You can flag your question and return back and check it again if time allows. So always try your solution to the problem. Make sure that you've answered all the questions and just take your time, but also be careful when you are answering and solving a math equation. All right. Number 8, get familiar with a test structure and questions. So all of those resources that I just went over, you should download them, look at them, at least be familiar with the Blue Book app. You can download that app and test it out and look at some sample questions. 9, try your best. Get a good night's sleep before. No good has come from cramming and from studying the night before. Eat a healthy breakfast. Make sure that you get a good night's rest and that you're not too stressed out, and make sure you stay hydrated. And 10, relax. The PSAT and SAT are just tests. They are in no way going to measure how well you do in life. They're not going to be an indicator of that at all. It's just one simple test. Students are so much more than just those test scores. You will have value no matter how well you score. And guess what? A lot of colleges are test optional now because they understand that a single test score does not define who you are as a person. They're looking at so much more. They're looking at test scores, they're looking at grades, they're looking at the overall transcript, whether students improved or not over time. They're looking at personal statements, they're looking at recommendation letters, extracurriculars. They're really looking at the whole student, not just a test score. So relax. This isn't you know, a dire situation where you have to score perfectly. Just enjoy your high school experience and just follow these steps to try and prepare the best you can. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you learned more about the PSAT and SAT through watching this very long video. Thank you so much for staying tuned till the very end.